broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk. Welcome to The Gailey Show, the only daily LGBTQ radio news and talk show in the United States. I am your host, John Parker. Coming up after us, we have the best in progressive news and analysis because we know there are a lot of things happening right now. So stay tuned after us on AM 950 for the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950 KTNF and Choose Views with Richard Chu on WCPT 820. This is our day of the week. However, we take a step back from the headlines and sit down with a guest or two, or in today's instance, four, to talk about an issue facing the LGBTQ and allied community to help us think more clearly and more queerly. That's why we call it Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly. Today, we're talking about a pink triangle. So my guests are Kirby Taylor, whose play A Pink Triangle depicts the last moments in a concentration camp where a father and son attempt to find common ground, hope, and forgiveness. Also joining us are Joe Eggers, Interim Director for the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and Bry Sharland, historian and artist and creator of Pink Triangle Portraits, which is a quest to create a portrait of every single photographed queer victim of the Nazi regime and paragraph 175 in Germany. Also here, friend of the show, Chris Bro, Greater Minnesota Community Organizer for Outfront Minnesota. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Gailey Show.
Thank you. Hello.
All right, I should say that the A Pink Triangle will be at Phoenix Theater in Minneapolis, October 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So this weekend, you can head to Phoenix Theater mpls.org for your tickets and more information. That's Phoenix Theater, mpls.org. Kirby, why don't we start with you? And big topic here, and I don't know for folks who haven't ever seen our logo, The Gailey Show, we have a pink triangle in the logo. We also have a 1980s motif with that sun because those are two periods of time, the 80s and the 1940s, which we feel are very historically relevant to us today and what we're going through as the queer community, not just in the US, but globally. So when this came across our radar, thank you, Chris, for bringing this to our attention. I thought we absolutely have to talk about this. So Kirby, can you tell us about your play?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, it's called A Pink Triangle. And it's a two-person show. It's a father and son on stage in what could be their last moments together. There are so unknowns in that situation, and they are estranged. And so they're trying to find common ground. They're trying to understand each other because they don't know when their last moment could be. And the pink triangle is what marks the son who is a gay man. And so that's where the name comes from. It was originally what the Nazis used to mark gay men in concentration camps is the pink triangle. But it's about personal experience. It's about connections. It's in the end, it's about father and son trying to really know each other, even though they seem like strangers on a stage.
Were they, I want to be mindful of not giving away plot, but were they estranged and then reunited in the camp, or?
Yeah, and we do dig into that quite a bit further, and we learn more about why they're estranged in the very beginning of the show. It is as if they are strangers, and that is in part based historically in, the idea that pink triangles were ostracized, and it was a lonely experience in the camps because even to be seen speaking to somebody with a pink triangle would have ramifications. So that's, something historical that I wanted to touch on is even though you may have a friend who's a pink triangle in that hierarchy of the camp system, it was dangerous to associate with pink triangles.
Mm. Talk to me about the historical research that you did coming into this. Is this based on a true story specifically, or were you creating this from a variety of different historical resources?
Yeah, it is not based on a true story. It's based on many, many references. I definitely dug into the history, so I felt confident that the details were historically accurate, but I did not focus on any specific individual. So this is not based on anybody specifically, but read a lot of books, dug in as much as I could. One of the things that is a heartbreak on top of heartbreak is that there are not a lot of survival stories that were told about pink triangles, because even after the war, it was still illegal to be a gay man. So the amount of surviving testimonies are so few. So for me, it wasn't about trying to retell those stories. It was about trying to make a different connection with historical fiction. But it's part of why I love so much about what Bry is trying to do, which is to create a life for these individuals, even if we know very little about them.
And for folks just to kind of help situate them, we have actually a monthly contributor, Dr. Samuel Clues-Hunicki, who wrote the book, basically, or one of the books about paragraph 175. And for folks who don't know what that is a law that was criminalizing what they called homosexuality at the time. And it started with the Weimar Republic, so in the 1930s, 20s and 30s Germany, and then the Nazis took it over and made it their own. And then after the fall of the Nazis, both the Soviet GDR Republic of Germany and West Germany both retained paragraph 175 and made it their own and continued to prosecute gay men under it. Bry, can you tell us about the quest that you are on and the portraiture that you do?
Sure. This sort of started in high school for me. I was learning online about the experiences of queer people in the Holocaust, and it was not something we were being taught about. So I actually was given the opportunity to teach my class about it. And so that's really what the inception point was. And as time went on, I learned more and more. And eventually it became a whole artistic project. And it was very limited at first. And it was just going to be about some of the survivors that spoke out. And over time, it's become documenting everyone. And not just documenting them, but kind of restoring some of their agency and dignity and color, and showing them as the queer individual they should have been or were, and not just focusing on the really negative part of their life. So there's been sort of an evolution in my work as well, where early on it was just about documentation and finding their stories and sharing it. And now it's about really celebrating them as well for what they could have been.
The photos are very vibrant in terms of color. Talk to me about your artistic vision of how you want. I mean, there's a variety of ways that you could have gone about this. You could have done, black and white pencil, charcoal. You've chosen, very vibrant colors here. Talk to us about how you wanted to
Show us.
Yes. So it's Frida. So yeah, no, for sure. That's something that evolved as well. And when I first started many years ago, it was this theme of fading and the fading memory of what happened and the lack of education about it, and sort of the haunted experience that a lot of the elderly survivors were speaking about. And that really changed. And again, as time went on, I wanted to restore their color and restore their dignity and restore who they were and share their stories, and not just let the Nazis have the last word in their image and their story. And finding the biographical details in those documents and seeing it a little bit through a modern lens, but trying to tell it from the point of view of that queer person, and removing the fascist overtones in it, and making it again more about that person, who they loved, what they experienced. And so it's really about transforming it. So it's really a transformative work as well.
Snaps for Bryce.
Thank you. And so naturally part of that is they became much brighter. And I'm obsessed with saturated colors and very, very bright colors and neon in my own work. And so it naturally made sense to go more in that direction. I put a couple of them behind me so you can show off a little bit. But so that's really where the inspiration came from in terms of the visual design of the project as it stands now.
It was awesome. I reached out to Bry when I was putting together the show. And so if you come to the Pink Triangle this weekend, his portraiture is in the lobby, along with bios about the individuals, as much as we know about them. So you're getting a full experience of, yes, this is historical fiction on stage, but here are the real individuals that suffered under paragraph 175. Here's what we know about them, and really give life to these individuals.
We're talking about the play A Pink Triangle that will be at Phoenix Theater October 3rd through the 5th this weekend. The playwright Kirby Taylor joins us. This play depicts the last moments in a concentration camp where a father and son attempt to find common ground, Hope, and Forgiveness. With us is Joe Eggers, Interim Director for the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Bry Sharlin, who is a historian and artist and creator of Pink Child Portraits, and Chris Bro, who is the Greater Minnesota Community Organizer from Outfront, Minnesota. Kirby, I am curious, how did you come to this topic as a playwright?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually my first play. And so part of it was inspiration in that I wanted to make something that was on a small scale, 2 people on a black box stage where you could do it anywhere. And so in part that was a part of it, but I've always had an interest in the subject ever since I first heard about it. But only 2 years ago, did I hear about the pink triangles. And I remember being incredibly livid that I had not heard about it, or if I had glanced over it and not dug into it. And so once I had heard, I wanted to know as much as possible. And so it became a show, not just reading numbers and facts, which I think a lot of us are taught about the Holocaust is the great numbers, and it's hard to fathom something that huge. So I wanted to create a personal experience of, 2 individuals who are trying to deal with these incredible, terrible circumstances. So really it came from me not knowing anything about this history, even though I feel like I should have and have read quite a bit about it and have visited the sites. And so that's where the show came from.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I have to fit in a quick break here, and this is going to be a transition to, we want to thank our travel partner, Travel Marquette, for making this show possible. And the reason why we're grateful to be in partnership with Travel Marquette is that it's become a very special place to me. For the past 10 years, I've been going to Marquette at least twice a year, and I love it because I can travel there while being queer and not have to worry about it, as it's a university town, super blue city, and a reliably blue county with a very active pride organizations with events throughout the year. There's just something about hiking along its rivers, strolling along the coastline, and standing next to very huge, gorgeous waterfalls that, as they say, refills my cup. If that is something that you would like to do and join me for the Fresh Coast Film Festival in mid-October, you can get your travel started at travelmarquette.com, travelmarquette.com. You're listening to The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF and WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I'm your host, John Parker. We are coming up on the bottom of the hour. This is our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest or 2, or 4, as it is today, to take a deep dive into an issue facing the LGBTQ and allied community. Our guests today are playwright Kirby Taylor, whose play A Pink Triangle depicts the last moments in a concentration camp where a father and son attempt to find common ground, hope, and forgiveness. It is playing this weekend at the Phoenix Theater in Minneapolis, October 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Also joining us are Joe Eggers, Interim Director for the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Bry Sharlin, historian and artist and creator of Pink Triangle Portraits, and Chris Bro, Greater Minnesota Community Organizer at Outfront, Minnesota. Joe, can you tell us about the Pink Triangle? Where did it originate from, and how was it utilized by the Nazi government?
Yeah, so in its attempts to cordon off what the National Socialists would deem undesirables, developed a badge system, right? And I think we're all sort of familiar with the yellow star for Jewish Jewish population, but the pink triangle is really meant as a demarker of homosexuals under Nazi era Germany, and really meant to cordon them off. As Kirby was talking about, it really was about this sort of humiliation and dehumanization of queer Germans at that time, to really anything that would combat this idea of hypermasculinity within Nazi era Germany was meant was seen as the main objective, right? Anything that would interfere with the progress, the ability for Germany to create a new Aryan strong race was the enemy, and homosexuals were a key target of the regime. They were seen as the antithesis of this ideal, and unlike lesbian women, weren't seen as redeemable, right? You could always force women into relationships with men, but there was no plausible outcome for men. And so even as Kirby alluded to earlier, talking about this hierarchy within the camps, there were attempts to silo off homosexual men, that there was no way to secure them of this undesirable traits. And until it became impractical, men were segregated individually, right? So you weren't even a part of the camp process. You were kept by themselves. But then as the number of detained men increased, you had this camp atmosphere that was exceedingly hostile toward homosexual men. I think the rates of death among queer men during in the camps was the highest of any group throughout the Holocaust and German persecution, and it was because of this idea that it interfered with Germany, that there was no chance of quote unquote curing homosexuality in men.
And if my history serves me, after the camps were liberated, gay men were re-imprisoned by both governments, West and East Germany.
So, and what we think about, we talk about the Holocaust and the German persecution of Jewish communities as being this long continuum of anti-Semitism, really exists with the queer community in Germany, right? This paragraph 175 existed in German since German reunification in 1871. So you have 70 years of institutionalized persecution of queer Germans, leading up to the rise of national fascism within Germany, and then afterward the continual minimizing of queer voices and perspectives from the Holocaust, right? So this continued erasure. It wasn't until 2008 that Berlin created its first memorial to queer victims of the Holocaust, when it created the memorial site. I think it's across the street from the really famous Berlin Monument, right? And so I think that speaks to what Kirby and Bry have talked about, is this minimization and erasure of victims, that we're not talking about individuals, that they're really seen as an afterthought in a lot of cases. I think it's the last group that has had a memorial site created in Berlin. Berlin has memorials, rightfully so, to all groups, but it wasn't till 2008 that the memorial sites were actually really complete.
As a symbol, why the pink triangle? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think it was, again, this idea of humiliation, right? This,
but like the design of it, like the Jewish star makes sense because that was part of their faith tradition. Like, where did they come up with the idea that we're gonna put pink triangles on people that on gay men?
I think part of it was visibility, and honestly, the Jewish stars were, the Star of David was so closely associated with Jewish people that it was easy to identify them. Mm-hmm. I think part of it is the visibility of having a bright symbol, an easy to create symbol, but also the mm-hmm. pink was a way to publicly humiliate folks.
And there were noted homosexuals in Nazi leadership, however, before they were, I guess, excised, correct?
Yeah, there were. Ernst Röhm was leader of the Brown Shirts, and really Hitler's number 2, and was a fairly out queer man in early the early rise of fascism in Germany, and was purged in the Night of the Long Knives. And what's really interesting is, and you see queer intellectuals in Germany sometimes gravitate toward that, looking at Ernst Röhm as, well, there could be potential protection for them within Nazi era Germany, and clearly wasn't the case. The purge happened shortly after. I think it was 1934 when Ernst was killed, assassinated on Hitler's orders.
Could I add something to that just briefly? The whole concept of the gay Nazi and SS officer was sort of this contrived history that was used by other leftist groups to kind of exclude queer experiences further. Even though this was not necessarily a common thing unless they were hiding, it was used, and it continues to this day, to marginalize queer people that experienced this trauma by saying that, there were queer capos and there were queer SS members, but Himmler had ordered any SS member or police member that was caught being gay to be executed. So there is sort of this exaggeration of that, and it certainly does not really reflect the reality. They were not living out gay people at that time.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have to fit in a very quick break here. We are talking about the play A Pink Triangle, which will be at the Phoenix Theater this week on October 3rd through the 5th. We're going to have more with our guests when we come back. You're listening to The Gailey Show. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. It is 33 minutes after the hour. I am your host, John Parker. It is our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode. We sit down with a guest or four to help us think more clearly on the major issues of the day facing the queer and allied community. My guests today are Kirby Taylor, whose play A Pink Triangle depicts the last moments in a concentration camp where a father and son attempt to find common ground, hope, and forgiveness. A Pink Triangle plays at the Phoenix Theater this weekend, October 3rd through the 5th. You can head to phoenixtheatermpls.org or kirbytaylor.com for more information and to get your tickets. Also joining us are Joe Eggers, Interim Director for the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Bryce Sharland, historian and artist and creator of Pink Triangle Portraits, which is a quest to create a portrait of every single photographed queer victim of the Nazi regime in paragraph 175. Also here is Chris Bro, Greater Minnesota Community Organizer for Outfront Minnesota. Chris, if I can start this segment out with you, there's a real importance to be learning from this particular period of history as we are looking to organize today with the current administration and the MAGA movement. Can you talk to the need for understanding that history and how it can impact what we're doing today and part of our resistance?
Yeah, it's a really great point. I'm wearing a pink triangle. When I was a younger person, my husband and I were in San Francisco, and this wonderful lady was, "Hey, do you want this little trinket?" And I was like, I don't know, because I didn't know about the pink triangle and what had happened. So going back to Bry's point about being young and not hearing about these things, I hadn't learned. And so going to that park in San Francisco, which is one of the few in the world that does commemorate those individuals in those situations of World War II and Nazi Germany and fascism, was powerful. And we need to make sure that we're learning from that, because there are a lot of parallels between what was happening then versus what is happening now. When we talk about paragraph 175, that's from 1871, yet we have a federal government who's using the Alien and Enemies Act of 1798 to get things happening now to attack immigrants. We see just 5 days ago, the Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence presidential memorandum that is purposefully ambiguous. It's supposed to be scary, and it has very vague words around investigative language about funders and organizations. And this is meant to scare people. It's meant to further divide our community. So we need to learn from the past what did happen and start getting in front of those situations now, right? We need to speak up. This is the time where our voices really matter. And if we don't learn, you hear it often, the past will repeat itself. I remember being young and one of my teachers saying, you know, when we get to the point in our future where the last people who died in World War I and World War II are gone, we stand to have this happen all over again because nobody is there to give words to those situations. So I'm so honored to be here chit-chatting with this group, and how Kirby is doing all the work that she's doing to get this information out there right now. And also just a little bit of a shout out to Bri over there. I've come across your work historically, and it's absolutely wonderful. And so this is a very powerful time. And there's a lot of communities, a lot of people who are scared. And so we need to learn our history and get in front of it.
Yeah, to add to that, I've gotten a lot of feedback on the show, and a few people have mentioned how current it feels. And I always say, I wrote this before the election. You guys, I wrote it before. And so the fact that you're feeling that replication, or if it feels similar to you, there's a reason for that. You know, history is known to repeat itself when we don't pay attention. So I've been receiving a lot of that feedback as well.
Joe, erasure, the theme of erasure seems to be coming up in this particular segment, and erasure, as I understand it, is considered the final stage of a genocide. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, it's really that idea of denial and erasure, that if we don't acknowledge victims having experienced or survived a genocide, does it ever really happen? And I think this is where this kind of work is so critically important. I think we've all talked about today that this isn't something that we learned in school, right? And as we're now, Minnesota becomes a state that is requiring Holocaust and genocide education, thinking about new ways that make this work relevant both to understanding the past and the present, I think is so critically important. And the arts are such an important way. I think Kirby's A Pink Triangle and Bri's artwork are phenomenal ways to ensure that new generations don't forget about this, right? The mantra of the Holocaust is never again. And yet we see it happen repeatedly, and we're humanizing these people in a way that really combats that idea of erasure. And I think we're really seeing an exciting time to be having these conversations. We just saw the Guthrie do an amazing performance of Cabaret, and I think A Pink Triangle comes at the heels of that in a really fascinating and important time, because I think Cabaret sets this up, and then A Pink Triangle really continues that conversation in a really meaningful and important way.
Mm-hmm. We have this very active erasure happening from both the Nazi government and then successive governments in Germany. And yet the Nazis kept very meticulous records, unlike a lot of other perpetrators were, down to, charts and graphs. Kirby and Bri, can you talk about sifting through the historical record? Because for every queer historian that I've had on the show, they talk about how difficult it actually is to go in and find authentic records and to find things that we can very clearly be able to tell the stories of queer history. You're both doing that on a very active basis right now. Can you tell us about your experiences of sifting through the archives, if you will, to find the material that you are now presenting to the world, written form for Kirby for you and visual, Bri for you? Bri, maybe we can start with you.
Sure, absolutely. And I've seen both sides of that. So the number one place that I've enjoyed getting my resources from is firsthand from survivors. And there are written testimonies of survivors. And I want to acknowledge that there are about 28 survivors that went on film at some point and shared their testimony, even when, it was career suicide or they were just terrified to share their story. So when I do my talk for my show, I start by acknowledging and showing them, because a lot of people don't realize there are that many. Once you start digging, you keep finding more. And some of them are hidden. Some of them are in very old German documentaries, but they're out there. When you talk about erasure, there was a concerted effort by academia and governments to put down this history. It's not that this history was not shared, because there have been people willing to share that story, like Richard Gruna, starting in the 40s and the 50s. But the people that were that brave at that point were continually told, no, you are not a victim, you are a criminal. And their stories and their request for reparations was hidden. So I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that there was an attempt to silence and censure this, not that it was not being documented. So in terms of doing the research, yes, I spent a week at the archive at the Holocaust Museum in DC, and there is definitely that gap to find this information. A lot of it is in archives in Germany, and you have to sign releases to even access some of it at the Holocaust Museum. And there's a lot of steps to get this information. Instead of just being in high school history books, there is all this extra work that you have to do to be able to get in there and find it. While the Nazis were meticulous in their record keeping, there was a concerted effort at the end of the war to destroy a lot of what was happening at the camps. And not only that, as late as the 1990s, there was, I forget which city in Germany, but they were actively shredding hundreds of files about gay prisoners because they thought it wasn't worth keeping and they needed to make more room. It was stopped about halfway through, but they destroyed a ton of information. So it's fragmented. There are places where you can find quite a bit of information. A lot of it is hidden. Sometimes you have to read between the lines to figure out what was going on. Sometimes you have to, like I said before, see it from the victim's point of view, rather than what the Nazis were writing about them, to try to find out what was really going on here. Because there's a whole range of experiences that happen. And, if you were well connected and, your father was high up in the Nazi party, sometimes they could make charges go away. But your boyfriend, no, he was going to the camp. And there's several instances I found of that specific instance happening. But anyway, sorry, Kirby, you can go ahead too. So, yeah.
No, not at all. I think that you have a very unique window into the history on this topic because you've had those amazing experiences to go into the archives. I utilize what I was able to find, on in the book world and online, and going to these individual places. I went to Mauthausen earlier this year, and they have a memorial triangle to homosexual victims of the Holocaust, and I was able to experience that firsthand. But I will reiterate what Bri said, which is to seek out these firsthand stories where you can. 38 isn't a huge number, it's a great that we have more than none, but to try to seek those out in their individuality and give life to those stories, because it was so difficult for them to tell their story even in modern times.
Chris,
one thing I would add to that too, actually, is that, when we talk about similarities between then and now, it came right at a time when queer liberation was really happening in Germany. And then all of a sudden it was this lockdown, shutdown, absolutely not, this death, right? And there was this erasure of these files. And we're seeing a lot of that right now, right? Like, we are seeing more queer and trans people with rights. And now all of those are under attack. We see our federal government changing different memorials, our Stonewall Memoriam, to exclude certain groups. Like, this erasure, that similarity, it is happening right now.
Well, I mean, they're erasing literal LGBTQ health research off of federal databases. They just deleted a report that said far-right groups commit the most violence of any political group, right, in the country. They're doing a lot of erasure right now, the MAGA administration. Chris, I did want to, we're talking about storytelling and the importance of telling these stories so that we don't forget. You're an organizer. Tell us how that functions on the ground.
A lot of it comes down to our queer liberation histories, because people are so fearful. People do want to know, what can they do right now? And so educating yourself is so important. So when we do this organizing, it is a lot of that just education, especially as we are seeing more young queer people show up who don't have this knowledge. I'll actually be in Austin, Minnesota in a week and a half, 2 weeks, something along those lines. And we're doing a queer liberation and intersectionality studies conversation, right? And that's more of a rural space that those conversations don't happen. And since this is during queer history, this is a great time to have that conversation. And so we try to just make sure that we're sharing our information. And as an organization goes, I'm older, and when it comes to individuals within my organization, so I have a little bit of a unique experience, and I come from Arizona, that's a little bit more red. So being able to share those different perspectives that I've had with people younger than I am, it's really valuable, and people get a lot from those moments.
Huge question to ask, like under 2 minutes. We can start it and then maybe come back when we after the commercial break. Joe, I'm Armenian American, and so my grandparents and great grandparents were survivors of the Armenian genocide. So denial is nothing new to me. I've grown up having to navigate denial. Talk to us about. I've just got a minute left here about strategies of remembrance, of overcoming that erasure. That's the final stage of a genocide.
Wow. Well, yeah, that is a big question for 1 minute. I know what I will say is that the work of Kirby and Bry to do this sort of contesting popular narratives or mainstream narratives is the way to do that, right? Is putting this out there and confronting the way that we are in remembering, or in this case, not remembering events is the simplest way, and what that actually means and how that manifests, I think, is a much larger conversation. Mm-hmm. But this work is difficult and challenging. I mean, I think if we look at Armenia too, right, this idea of recognition takes forever, or can take.
I want to pick that up when we come back here. You're listening to The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF and WCPT 820 Chicago's Progressive Talk. We'll be back with these absolute stellar guests talking about the play A Pink Triangle at the Phoenix Theater. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I'm John Parker, and we are already coming up on the top of the hour. We've been talking today about A Pink Triangle, a play that depicts the last moments in a concentration camp where a father and son attempt to find common ground, hope, and forgiveness, playing this weekend at the Phoenix Theater in Minneapolis. Joe, I asked you the biggest question right before the break about the need for strategies of how to combat and overcome the erasure, the final step of a genocide. And if you want to pick it up there, and also there's an event that is continuing that work that you want to talk about as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the work Kirby and Brian, others who are doing in the community is phenomenal, but I think the best way to combat this erasure is through education and holding our institutions accountable and making sure that history is put up that's inclusive and reflective of reality. I mean, that's why Minnesota now has one of the most encompassing mandates for Holocaust and genocide education. So we should have this expectation that teachers have access to resources and materials from institutions like a Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies to teach this in classrooms, so that we have a new generation of Minnesotans who can learn and talk about this and understand the implications, not only from the past, but from today. It is so critically important. And this is why we have public institutions. Minnesota, I believe, is fortunate to have a public Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, because this sort of work is what gives us relevancy. So one of the ways that our center is doing that is on November 13th, we're hosting Anna Hoikova for her new talk on her book, People Without History Are Dust, Queer Desires in the Holocaust. And that's at 6:30 p.m. at Queermunity over in Uptown above Majors and Quinn. And Anna is a phenomenal queer Holocaust historian who's really combating this idea of erasure and absent narratives in Holocaust history, in queer history. I think would be a really fascinating conversation. I think is something we should all take the time to be a part of and be at. And I hope to see many of us there.
If you want to have that conversation here on the show, let me know. We'll absolutely have that conversation here. You're talking about inclusion, and Bry, there has been some erasure from gay historians, as I understand it. You were saying in the break around the Pink Triangle and victims of it. Can you tell us more?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, a lot of the early historical work focused exclusively on gay men and queer men. And there was actually a concerted effort to deny the experiences of other queer people during the Nazi reign. And even to the point of there was a long attempt to get a memorial to lesbians that were killed in Ravensbrück that was blocked by gay historians and other historians, which I find very shameful. And the transphobia present in that period that continued forward is very prescient right now. And I've painted many trans people that were living freely at that time and that were persecuted. And I just want to acknowledge that lesbians, queer women, non-binary, and trans people were also persecuted, and their lives were upended, and many of them were murdered. And just because the numbers may not be equal doesn't deny their experience in any way. And so I just want to acknowledge that it is intersectional, and all of our experiences matter. And as gay men, you can't sacrifice their trans siblings. And I just wanted to make sure I put that out there.
Thank you for that. For the play this weekend, Kirby, there is sort of an interactive component where people can submit questions right now, as I understand it. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have a talkback panel after the 2 p.m. show on October 4th on Saturday, and that starts pretty much right after at 4 p.m. Chris is going to be on our panel. I'll be on the panel. Our actors. We have a professor of history from the U of M joining us, and it's an opportunity to talk about the show, talk about the creative process, but also the history it's based on, and once again, the importance of speaking about history for our modern times. So there's an opportunity to send in your questions ahead of time. Visit our @A Pink Triangle play on Instagram to send in your questions. We'd love to hear from you. And then, of course, you can always just bring them right to the show, and we'll be happy to speak on those. So I'm looking forward to it. It's my first talkback panel.
And that panel will be hosted by AM 950 Radio's very own Ellie Krug.
Very excited.
That'll be exciting. Also, Kirby, we're already talking about next steps for the show, obviously this weekend, but after this weekend, folks can license the play and bring the play to their neighborhoods, yeah?
Absolutely. That's my ultimate goal is for this play in the store to get as far and wide as possible to start conversations like the ones we're having right now. And it's a 2-person show. It's written to be bare bones and picked up and logistically simple so that museums can put it on, colleges can put it on. So if you're interested in doing a pink triangle at your organization, reach out because we'd love to help you do that.
Thank you for giving us that information. And Chris, for folks ready to get in and fight the resistance now, how can folks connect with you, and what can they connect with as you're moving forward with Outfront?
Yeah, we have several different departments, so depending on what you need, I would say reach out via our email, organizing@outfront.org, and you can connect with us and talk about ways to engage.
Perfect. The show is A Pink Triangle. Its run is extended October 3rd through the 5th at the Phoenix Theater. For tickets, you can head to phoenixtheatermpls.org or kirbytaylor.com. You can check out Bry's Pink Triangle portraits and more at brian.charland.com, and to connect with the work of the Genocide and Holocaust Studies and Joe at the University of Minnesota, you can go to cla.umn.edu/CHGS. Or I guess you could just Google that or search for that in the University of Minnesota search engine. And of course, outfront.org to connect with Chris and all of the excellent resistance and activism and educational work that Outfront Minnesota does for us here in the state of Minnesota. Thank you all for joining me today. This has been very illuminating, and congratulations. Thank you rather for all of the work that you are doing on behalf of the queer community.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. On WCPT 820, listeners there, it's time for Choose Views with Richard Chu. On AM 950, it's time for the Matt McNeil Show. Stay tuned after that for Native Roots Radio. Then at 10 p.m. Central, step into the unknown on Ghost Box Radio with Greg Bakken. And until tomorrow, keep it queer, America.